Okay, I welcome everybody to the June meeting of the Planning Board. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for May 29, 2019. Do we have a motion
So moved.
Second.
on the motion?
Aye.
Now, before we get into the evening's agenda, many of us received some sad news just tonight, that a gentleman by the name of Jim Maloney, who spent umpteen years on the zoning board in this village, I don't know exactly how many, but certainly 25 or more, and was a volunteer in so many different ways in the village, and a loved person, died suddenly today. So we ask maybe just today at the beginning for a moment of silence to respect Jim and what he did. Thank you. The first thing I'm going to mention tonight are the adjournments for the evening. There are 4 of them. 3 of them are continuations of public hearings. The first adjournment is Michael Degan, 86 Crest Drive, additions and alterations to a single-family home. Second, Peter Bartolacci, 67 Miller Avenue, removal of railroad tie wall, construction of retaining walls and landscaping of rear yard. And the third, Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Mary, 32 Warren Avenue, driveway widening, construction of retaining walls, and demolition of existing structure. There is also one preliminary presentation adjourned tonight, which is Lexington 202 Group, LLC, 29 South Depot Plaza, referral by Board of Trustees for review of petition for zone changes to allow for the development of 46 residential units above a self-storage facility with parking. So the first continuation of public hearing that we have this evening is a public hearing on the accepted SDEIS for Artis Senior Living, and I'm going to first read the notice of the public hearing for Artis Senior Living. Please take notice that on May 29th, 2019, the Planning Board as lead agency under SEQA accepted the supplemental draft environmental impact statement dated May 29, 2019, as adequate for the purpose of commencing public review and comment regarding issues addressed in the adopted scoping outline for the proposed action. Pursuant to Part 617 of the implementing regulations pertaining to Article 8, SEQA Review Act of the Environmental Conservation Law, called SEQA, and Chapter 147, the Village Environmental Quality Review of the Code of the Village of Tarrytown, the Planning Board of the Village of Tarrytown will hold a public hearing on Monday, June 24th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in the Municipal Building, 1 Depot Plaza, Tarrytown, New York, to receive comments on the SDEIS document submitted by Artis Senior Living of Tarrytown. Additional written comments from members of the public and involved and interested agencies will be accepted by the Planning Board as lead agency for 10 business days after the close of all the public hearings. Written comments should be addressed to Liz Mazzaros, Secretary to Planning and Zoning in Tarrytown. The property is located at 153 White Plains Road in the Village of Tarrytown and is shown on the tax maps of the Village of Tarrytown as Sheet 1.201, Block 121, Lot 5.12, and is located in the OB zone. The action involves a proposal to amend the Tarrytown zoning ordinance to create a new floating overlay zone and a site plan application to apply the new zoning to a 4.6 acre site located at 153 White Plains Road, New York State Route 119. If the zoning is amended, the applicant would seek approval to construct a 35,952 square foot, 64-bed Alzheimer dementia care facility. The SDIS can be accessed on the Village of Tarrytown website and is also available for review at the Warner Public Library during normal library hours or in the Tarrytown Village Hall, Planning and Zoning Department, 2nd floor. Before we get into the public hearing on this, I'd just like to mention very briefly the procedure that we will follow for the benefit of those who are watching on television and in the audience. The applicant will be required to provide responses to all the substantive comments or questions raised at this hearing in the final SEIS, which the applicant will prepare. The applicant does not have to make those responses tonight. There is a stenographer who will record these comments and provide them to the applicant. When we go through the process, I'm going to begin with those in the audience first and then have comments on questions from the board members and the staff. And I invite the applicant, if you wish to say a few opening words before we get into the public participation.
Thank you, Mr. Tedesco. Don Walsh, Development Strategies in White Plains, and speaking extemporaneously before we start, and for our very close friends, the Malones, I'm sure everybody's very grateful that this board mentioned that. I served with Jimmy for more than 30 years in the fire department here. We were officers together, and he was one of my best friends. And I think he did a lot for Tarrytown, and I think he would have been very, very glad to hear that this board and his colleagues on this board remembered that. And thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I'd like to introduce, on behalf of Artis Senior Living, the team that will speak briefly tonight. And I did promise you, Ron, that this would be, our presentations will be brief and lead into what we're doing. I'm going to introduce the site briefly. Right after me, my colleague Mark Fry of Main Street Consulting, who assembled most of this massive environmental impacts, draft supplemental environmental impact statement, will give the public knowledge of how it's set up and where you can access it, particularly if you do it online. Following him will be our counsel, John Kirkpatrick, who is sitting behind Mark. John will go over in particular the overlay zone and some of the legal questions that have come up for the benefit of the public. And finally, our engineer, Richard Williams of Insight Engineering in Carmel, who has been working on this site. Insight's been working on this site with us for more than 16 years, will bring up a summary of the engineering material to date. Also at this time, I'd like to briefly introduce the principals of this matter. The Executive Vice President of Artis Senior Living, Max Ferentinos, is here and will be available in case the board has questions in his direction. The owners of the site, Crescent Associates, LLC. Many of you know the Silverman family, but Leon Silverman is here tonight, over here on the right, and with him is another Crescent shareholder, his daughter, Jill Greenspan, who does an awful lot of the day-to-day work on the site. So again, we have principals here just in case there are questions that might go in their direction. But again, we have done this before with you, and we have always submitted everything in writing after the fact, trying to be clear, subject to your review. The site is up here, and I'd like to hope the camera can pick it up. This shows you that we have Martling Avenue, which comes off Prospect and heads up this way, going towards Ridgecroft. This site is above the aqueduct and behind what a lot of us call the Goebel or Hummel building, even though it's was once part of the site that includes 155 White Plains Road, which, as many of you know, was originally the Peter Sharp Holdings. Then it became Kaiser Permanente, had more of a medical bent. Eventually, the property was sold to Crescent Associates, and through decisions of this board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, the interpretation was given that medical uses in that building and that complex were permissible, and it has become today just about entirely a medical related facility being rented to Columbia Doctors, which is part of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. They're the ones who are here on the site as tenants of Crescent Associates. The outline that we put in color on here shows you approximately what an Artis building looks like with its courtyards. It treats several different kinds of dementia patients, including the most common one being Alzheimer's. And it sets up in a garden-type setting on 2 stories, not what we originally permitted 3 when we had an office building that was contemplated here some years ago. But it's tried to produce more of a home atmosphere for the folks who are unfortunately in there for some period of time, if not for the rest of their lives. What we want to introduce tonight is the site itself. And this is one of those unusual things. What is a site doing in the village of Tarrytown that hasn't been developed at all, ever? And it's sitting right in the center of the village. How did this happen? How did it come about? We commented very briefly a year ago on this, but for the benefit of the public, we'll touch on it a little bit more. There was a family named Hoe, H-O-E, and their name appears prominently on some of the maps in the village, including the one in the back here. Mr. Hoe, the father, was the inventor of the rotary press. The rotary press made newspapers go from being 25 copies an hour when you had to lower some big press device on and make an ink impression that was common from the time of the Revolution to the 1840s. The rotary press allowed 25,000 copies of papers an hour. Also, it could be adapted for currency, and it could be adapted for postage stamps, which were invented in 1847 and were being produced by that press. The Hoes made a fortune. And they owned basically everything in Tarrytown, from Church Street, which many of you know runs east and west. They owned everything from Church Street all the way down to Irvington. The first Robert Hoe, his estate sat roughly between the Thruway Authority and the State Police, the new buildings that are down by the bridge now, almost where the toll booths were in a previous life before they became electronic. That was Mr. Hoe Sr. The next Mr. Hoe, Mr. Hoe Jr., lived in an estate just on the side of Church Street. The one we really care about, the one that owned this site, is Robert Hoe III. Robert Hoe III owned Mercyhurst. Mercyhurst sat where Temple Beth Abraham is today. There's traces of it still. If you walk along 9, you can see there's old stone walls. There's a curve of a stone wall right on the corner of Leroy and 9. That's not it. That was built as a retaining wall in the 20s. But the original Hoe walls ran along 9 from that point on and then up the hill slightly up Leroy. Mr. Hoe was a horticulturist. And if you drive into the Temple Beth Abraham parking lot today and stop and look north right up to Grove Street, you'll see the remnants of all his greenhouses. They're still there, little curved arches. They're set into the side of the hill. There's one cistern left that fed that. And Dan, you and I talked about this not that long ago when we were talking about why are there lead pipes running down into Leroy Avenue? They were the Hoe drainage pipes, and they fed off the cisterns that accumulated water and fed the greenhouses. There's one left, and if you walk down Grove Street, past the last house on the right, 159, this is not South Grove, but the regular Grove Street proper, right past 159, look down, scuff at the earth there, and you'll find a wooden cover, and that's the last cistern. That's still there. And that fed those greenhouses. The Laurie house, which is on the right as you go down that little dirt road portion of Grove Street, was a servant's quarters there and was later converted into her house. Those who don't know her name, Mrs. Laurie owned Russell and Laurie's, which today is the restaurant at the very top of Main Street, the Gyros place. And she was still running Russell and Laurie into her 90s in the 1960s. That was her house. Eventually, Mr. Hoe's house, which sat where Temple Beth Abraham is, fell into disrepair for reasons we'll get into in a minute. The only building left, really, besides the Laurie house, is the little Second Empire-style house right north of the medical building at 200 North Broadwich, right on the corner of Leroy and Route 9. That was the gatehouse for Mr. Hoe. Mr. Hoe was getting a lot of money in. Not only did he have the dividends and all, but he owned a great deal of property in Tarrytown. And he decided he would build the largest and most well put together private library in the world. And that's what he did, and that's what he built on this site, on the 153 White Plains Road site. He built a site to hold his Gutenberg Bibles, his Aldine press editions, his manuscripts from the Babylonian times, cuneiform tablets. They were all in there. Unlike the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, or the Grolier Library in the city, which he was a big part of, this is private. This is for one person. Want to go to Huntington Day? Absolutely. $17. We can walk in there together, and we have a wonderful time seeing the same Gutenbergs and the same things like that. Or we can go to Harvard University, the Whitner Library up there, where many of Robert Hoe's books are, for a reason I'll mention in a moment. Many of you may have seen the movie years ago, Trading Places. Maybe remember that? Eddie Murphy at the end of it, Dan Aykroyd. At the end, the Duke brothers, they were the evildoers in that one. They bet wrong on the stock market. At the end of it, Rip Torn is saying, seize the Duke brothers, seize their assets, sell everything. And they're being carted off. Robert Hoe invested through Lloyd's of London and insured the sugar crop in Cuba. And he insured it in 1898. Many of you may recall from your American history, there wasn't a sugar crop in 1898 because that was the Spanish-American War. No sugar crop. It was insured. Who had to pay? Seize Robert Hoe, seize his assets, sell everything, and cover the debt. And that is indeed what happened. The books were grabbed, seized by sheriff's orders, and shipped to London where they were appraised. It took 9 years to appraise them. They were all sold, though, and that covered a huge portion of the debt. And if you look on that map in the back, you'll see in a little note at the bottom where they show Irvington property, you'll see a huge line of subdivided lots, all with the name Robert Ho on them. All of those are sold, too. And believe it or not, that covered the debt. In those days, many, many millions of dollars in terms of today's money. Robert Ho lived comfortably in London and came back once or twice after that, but his asset, his library, was gone. The library itself and Mercyhurst were both seized, but they never were sold. They never had to be sold. They just sat there. Paul, you asked some time ago, why do we have all these retaining walls with all these miscellaneous rocks? That's because Tarrytown builders for years were walking in on this property that had been repossessed and was just sitting there and carting the rocks off. And they were using those in retaining wall structures all the way along. When I was a boy, I had the privilege of sweeping out the Historical Society at age 9. And I used to listen to Harry Storm, who was a veteran of the Great White Fleet here, meaning he went around the world for Theodore Roosevelt's orders in 1905, and Joe Rizzi, the last surviving doughboy here from World War I, talking about how they used to go in and take cartons of rocks out and build walls with them. And I never really understood it until I really went into it and found out what had happened. And that's what happened. The books were sold. Many of them ended up in libraries around the world. The most interesting story was Harry Widner himself, a young man who went over and bid on them all in England and got many of them and was so excited he shipped them all back to the United States. And then, leaving the auction, he waved one copy of Francis Bacon's essays, the only copy extant, over his head and said, I'm going to read this on the boat the way home, and I'll get home and sort out the books later. I'm sure you don't have to wonder what boat that was in 1912. But he went down with the Titanic. That was the last manuscript copy of Bacon's essays. His mother, who received all the books, the ones that were here in Tarrytown, endowed the Widner Memorial Library at Harvard, and they're there to this day. So an awful lot of what was in Tarrytown, if you're ever bored, you can go up there and take some pictures, they are there. Meanwhile, the site fell into disrepair. The buildings gradually fell in, the library building itself. The gates are still left there. They're on Martling. The Mercyhurst was completely gone because one of Tarrytown's leading contractors, A.P. Eusted, whose father is in this picture here, sitting in the center. His father's the one who dedicated the statue to Major Andre, the captors of Major Andre in 1885. Bert Eusted, who was 97 when he danced at our wedding, think about that, used to tell stories about how they went in and took rocks from the pile and built Hanford Place and built Cottage Place and built the rest of Grove Street with what they had. These were huge contractors' yards, and everything got dispersed, including the question you had about the walls, et cetera. The site sat there, eventually acquired by the folks who built the first automotive plant in North Tarrytown, the Maxwell plant. And again, that went on to a Mr. Lucas, who was in the insurance industry. He gradually subdivided out the back portions and moved it over into the site that became 155 White Plains Road. And it just sat there. The only thing that I know in my lifetime, almost 70 years now, is we had a couple of scout camping grounds in there in 1962 and 63. That was a winter campsite. And that's the last thing I remember ever happening in those fields since then. Since that time, when Crescent eventually acquired the property, they had an opportunity. They were approached by the village of Tarrytown in 2003 because Tarrytown was looking for a site to build a new firehouse with direct access up by the New York State Thruway. And in conversations Mr. Silverman had with the village at that time, and please, Leon, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had conversation with them, he donated a portion of the land, but he wanted to do it at the same time, have one site plan review, because he was thinking he might get an office building tenant down the road. So we did another one of these massive environmental impact statements and did a review with your board, and you approved a 60,000 square foot, almost twice as big as this building, 3-story, another story higher than this building, to go in the back, not quite where this is located, but more over here where the parking lot is now for Columbia Presbyterian. And the one condition Mr. Silverman asked was, let me renew the approvals automatically every few years because I don't have a tenant yet. And indeed, it sat there just like that. And when as many of you know, the office building market went down the tubes in 2008. We were very fortunate, Crescent was fortunate that Columbia Presbyterian looked at the site and took that as it was. They wanted a parking lot. We came back to you, and the poorest paving parking lot which is there today, was a result of that planning board matter. And at that time, we also re-subdivided the lots, and we were left with this portion of this lot left. And that's really the object of what we're here today. Part of this lot is the detention pond that was planned as part of the parking lot, and originally was part of the office building, and that's what you see down here now. We'll be talking about that, I'm sure, at different times, because the board has brought up some concerns about the design of that, which unfortunately is a state design, but the main concern seemed to be, is it a mosquito hazard? Even though we haven't found any trace of anything down there, we have been given the go-ahead to install the Avarcha traps there, which are probably the most common, well-working mosquito traps possible. And we would like to think that that is something that we can use to solve any issues that might ever come up with. This site right now is under contract between Artis Senior Living and Crescent. The contract is conditioned on the eventual approvals of a zone and of a design that is suitable to everybody. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this matter over to Mr. Fry. He will go through with you briefly what we have here and how this book is organized and where it is online. And Mark, you can also, in case any of the public have any comments, you can ask me to get in touch with you so you can direct them into the site, just in case there's a question. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Let me begin also by adding a word of appreciation for Jim Maloney. I've known him since 1980, and we can all celebrate a life well lived and an exemplar life. He was on the zoning board for at least 25 years, on the board of Transfiguration Church, extremely active right up to his death on the fire departments. So he will be sorely missed, and I want to personally extend my sympathy to his family. I'm going to be a brief. Don has asked me to highlight the contents, organization, and the places to physically or electronically review the SDEIS. Those who followed Chairman Tedesco have learned that it is available online on the Village's website. If you go to the Village's website, terrytowngov.org, and click on Planning Board, right there on the left-hand side, you'll see SECRA documents accepted, SDIS, Artis Senior Living, 153 White Plains Road. When you click on that link, you'll get the body of the document, the 5 chapters in front, and if you click on any of on the table of contents, it will automatically go to that section. Now, the book itself has grown. Back 15 years ago, we did 1 volume. This has grown, so it is now a 2-volume set, but it's as complete and correct as we can make it, and thanks to Mr. Galvin, we made 149 corrections to the earlier draft. So now it is at least adequate for public review. All public comments on the document can be directed to Liz Mazeros. You will see that she is here in the lead agency on the left on the cover, and also on the statutory cover sheet, which you'll see when you go on the web to see this document. The applicant, of course, Mr. Ferrantinos, can answer any questions that are strictly for the applicant himself. I am listed here as the preparer, but all public comments can be made tonight. They can be made in writing, all directed to Liz Mazeros. We'd love to hear what the public has to say about this book. But where can I go to get a hard copy? Where can I see the actual book? It's a lot easier to flip through the book. Right upstairs here, take the elevator to the 2nd floor. You'll see Liz there in the Building and Planning Department, and right there on the table is the 2-volume set. So you can take your time, work through the documents. What if I want to print out something? No problem, just go home, go online, and any of these 62 files that make up this document can be readily viewed on your home computer. You want to take some time to see the photo simulations, for instance, just click on them individually. You can blow them up to as large as your monitor. So we've tried to make it a very complete document. And I'm going to leave it pretty much at that for now. So I'm sorry, Warner Library. You can go to Warner Library to the reference room, and they have a set there. So you can spread out at a really big table there, flip through it, flip through volume 1, the body, and then all of the appendices you can simultaneously flip through, and the table of contents will direct you to what you're particularly interested in. I thought I would touch just on a moment on 3 very quick points. Page 50, page 50, page 98, and page 31. Page 50 describes what is the need for this proposed amendment. What's the need for this facility? My mother first started dropping stitches, forgetting words in 1993. It was the first signs of Alzheimer's. She suffered for 12 years and died in 2005 at the age of 85. She had the help, thanks to my father's good planning, to be in a continuing care community with assisted living. And one of the first things my father gave to each of us was a booklet from Park Davis, 140 pages, called Caring for the Caregiver. Caring for the Caregiver. Having Alzheimer's is no picnic. You get to the point you can't remember this nice man who happens to be your spouse of 55 years. But a person like my father, 85 years old, who has taken it upon himself to feed, to clothe, to bathe, to shop for, to cook for a person with Alzheimer's or dementia, very quickly will become a second victim of the disease. I won't go through all of the statistics, but right now 5 million Americans are suffering from Alzheimer's. By 2050, it will be 16 million. 1/3, 1 out of 9 individuals over 65, I'm over 65 myself, have Alzheimer's. 1 out of 3 individuals in America over the age of 85 will have Alzheimer's. There are 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 in the United States of America every single day. 10,000 per day turning 65. So this is a societal need that was not anticipated when the zoning code was written in 1959. I have a copy of the 59 code. It talks about elderly residences and so forth. So this was not provided for in 1959 in the Village of Tarrytown zoning code. It was not provided for in 1987. But there is a tremendous societal need, not only in Tarrytown, across Westchester, across the United States, and around the world. The statistics, that's page 50. Page 50. It will have a very favorable effect. The fiscal impact analysis, we have did a complete job on that. You'll find that starting on page 93. But on page 98, right now, the site, as it is right now, this minute, generates $24,160 per year, of which about 15,000 goes to the school district. 24,000, 15,000 to the school district. When this facility is completed in the first year, it will generate 17 times that much. It will generate $400,000 in taxes for the various, and it will generate $259,000 for the school districts. Or to put it another way, it will educate 9 Tarrytown children with no impact to anyone else. So there's a very large fiscal impact positive fiscal impact. There's a summary of that in another table that shows it will generate about $19 million in taxes over the 30-year life of the building. Would also direct those who are interested in the history. Don certainly did a wonderful job on it. It's all in the book, including the maps. And the number is 166,000 complete newspapers per hour. 166,000 16-page newspapers per hour were made possible by Robert Hoe III, inventing of the Lightning Press, a picture of which is in the book. So those of you, I think when Member Auckland was working on the comprehensive plan, he noted that we have to be careful as we move forward to also respect our past. Back in 1887, Robert Hoe III got together with 8 of his friends at exactly where the toll booths were until 2015 and decided they should form a book club. The book club he formed in New York City is the Grolier Club. It's doing extremely well, and in addition to all of the libraries that Don Walsh has just mentioned, you can see the original Gutenberg Bible from Robert Hoe's personal collection at the Grolier Club, tomorrow morning. So, again, thank you for the time. We welcome public input. The document, again, on the website. Warner Library, it's here upstairs, and also the same identical document is on my website. It's easy to remember, mainstreetconsulting.net, www.mainstreetconsulting.net, and boom, there you are on the front page. Thank you very much.
My name is John Kirkpatrick. I'm a city planner and a land use lawyer. I've been practicing land use and environmental law in the lower Hudson Valley for about 40 years now. As you heard from Don and Mark, we have a client with a proposal that should make a great deal of sense for the village. That client, Artis Senior Living, has a conditional contract on this property, meaning that if this all goes through, if the village decides that you agree this is a good idea, we get the zoning, we get the site plan approval, we get the special permit, then Artis will close and build this project. And as Rich Williams will explain after me, what we are showing you so far is a conceptual site plan for the property. It really has been prepared to confirm to Artis that this project is possible on this property, and also that we can do the level of environmental analysis necessary at this phase. My role in all of this really has been to come up with an appropriate zoning mechanism. This is not a permitted use in the village. It's not a permitted use in most municipalities in Westchester. And in fact, our client had an unfortunate experience in another village, which was not a total surprise to me when I heard about it, because as I said, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'm familiar with the concerns that arise when you propose something new. Well, in that particular village, my client came forward with this idea. The trustees thought it was a wonderful idea, and in fact, they thought it was so wonderful that they proposed a zoning amendment that would make it possible throughout that entire village. Naturally, there were a lot of people who were then alarmed at the possibility, and instead of it being received with open arms, it was received with fear, and the trustees had to do a fast retreat and decide, no, they didn't think they should approve this after all. That was very expensive to Artis, so we wish to avoid that kind of a situation. Therefore, I looked for a way to make a proposal to this village that would be very limited, at least in the beginning. If after Artis proceeds, the village decides that this is in fact a wonderful idea, and most of the citizens of the village decide it's a wonderful idea, well, certainly it's no problem for my client if you choose to expand the zoning. But at this point, we're proposing to make this applicable only on properties along Route 119. Now, we say that this would be a qualifying parcel of land in a floating/overlay zone. It happens that the village of Tarrytown was the first in New York State to use the concept of floating zone, and it was upheld by the Court of Appeals back in about 1950. And in fact, some of the apartment buildings in Tarrytown near this property were built under that floating zone. But the idea is that if you can show that your property qualifies for the conditions, then the trustees could, if they wanted to, apply this floating zone to your property. The underlying zoning remains as is, and the floating zone is added on top of it to add additional standards. I said qualifying parcels. We're talking about, it's got to be presently zoned OB, LB, or MU, and it's got to be either with frontage on 119 or partially within 350 feet of 119. So there are a series of parcels along Route 119 that qualify. The other condition is this has to be a lot that is in existence now. It's on a filed subdivision plat as of January, I think we said 2017. Now, a couple of issues that have come up have been that are sort of relate to the zoning proposal. One is, where are we going to get power? Because Con Ed has a moratorium on gas. Well, Con Ed set a deadline. They said, if you can make your application by a certain time, you're in. Artis did that. But just in case, Artis has also been looking at, are there other options for power? Unfortunately, wind and solar are not practicable at this location due to shading, limited site area, and particularly with regard to wind, aesthetic impacts. But there are other options that are on the table if it becomes necessary. The ideal, of course, is to stay with natural gas, and it appears that that's not going to be an issue. Another interesting question that's come up that we could have covered in the zoning has to do with affordability. There's no question that affordability of housing in general and this kind of a facility is a serious problem. It's a problem that many of us have faced for our parents. It's a problem that some of our children will probably face for us. And insurance just doesn't seem able to cover everything. Now, the cost of housing varies quite widely. For many people, even that is not affordable, but there are lots of programs out there about housing. There's Section 8. There's affordable housing, municipal requirements to add a percentage in any development. But those are all mechanisms that really just address the housing part of it. They don't address the health care part. And the health care is unpredictable. The cost of the health care from person to person and infirmity to infirmity can vary widely, and it can increase at an exponential rate. Any of you who are so lucky as to have long-term health care insurance, every now and then, for even that, despite everything, we get that little letter that says it's going up. Now, some states, notably New Jersey and Indiana, have statewide come up with proposals that set a level playing field and describe how there can be a system of coverage for both the housing and the healthcare aspects. Now, that means that facilities like this will then be built in communities where they're needed and not just in the communities that offer the best economic deal, because otherwise that's what would happen. Developers would just go where they can make the best economic deal. Statewide regulation solves that problem, and we are very much hopeful that New York will follow suit and come up with statewide regulation. Statewide regulation, by the way, would also address another interesting issue, which is that if you're talking about affordable housing with affordable health care, you've got to think about how you're going to govern that. And that means that you'd have to be able to do asset review, looking at a professional level, what are an applicant's assets, meaning several years of tax returns, bank accounts, looking at whether money has been transferred to relatives, looking at Social Security, disability, retirement, fixed assets, investments, and then, of course, over and over again, doing that every year to see if anything has changed. That's a very complicated process for a village to take on. But at this point, we are at a very initial point of this process. You're looking at an environmental impact statement that has shown you a zoning mechanism that has not been approved by the trustees. The trustees are awaiting your opinion and recommendation on that. You're looking at a preliminary site plan that gives you some kind of idea of what the environmental impact of this would be. And you're looking at this impact statement and waiting for the comments of the public and other agencies on that. What the process means, as the chair went through, there are going to be many opportunities for discussion. We, of course, would like to move the process along as much as we can. So mainly, I am asking tonight that once you've heard from Rich and taken a quick look at the preliminary site plan, that you please give very serious consideration to closing the environmental public hearing tonight and set a deadline for written comments and ask us to take those written comments and prepare an FEIS for submission to you for review. So at this point, I would like to ask Rich to give you a run-through on what we know about the site plan so far.
Come around so I can point. Good evening, my name is Rich Williams, I'm with Insight Engineering. I'm just going to take a few minutes and walk you through the site plan. As Don mentioned
Sorry,
before.
could you stand on the other side of the map, just because the mic is above you? It's
Yep.
pointing. Thanks.
Just to point out to the site plan, we have White Plains Road, which runs east to west. This is the bottom of the page. North is up on the drawing. You have the existing 155 White Plains Road development here. Hitachi, Marshall Cavendish, Ridgecroft. And this is the piece of property that we're talking about tonight. It's 4.6 acres. We're proposing to access the site through the existing 155 White Plains parcel. So we would come in the main entrance. We'll be creating an access drive, performing slight reconfiguration of the existing parking lot on 155 White Plains Road, and coming into our site. When you come into our property, we'll split into 2 parking areas. We have a total of 44 parking spaces. Most of the development will be located in areas that were previously shown to be disturbed as part of the previous EIS process. Namely, we'll be developing the eastern half of the site. There's a band of steep slopes that form the western edge of our limits of development. We're trying to stay out of those steep slopes to the maximum extent practicable. Also, on the western portion of our property along the old Croton Aqueduct, in the southwestern corner, there's a small locally regulated wetland, and we'll be staying out of the wetland and the 100-foot buffer associated therewith. From there, the site plan is relatively simple. Again, we have the parking lots on the front and side of the building. We will be creating an emergency access for the fire department that extends out to Martling Avenue. Our building itself is contained. We have a secure courtyard that forms the rear of the property. This is a heavily landscaped courtyard. It is fenced with decorative fencing for the security of the residents. Within that courtyard, we'll be weaving stormwater management practices. One thing that has changed since the previous EIS process is the stormwater regulations. We have provided a New York State DEC required practice, which is still required, but the new regulations now require that we put green infrastructure ahead of that. And we have designed a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is part of the documents provided, which meets the new regulations. That includes bioretention filters weaved in throughout the courtyard. Those are shallow, depressed landscapes features with engineered soil media. that allow for stormwater runoff from the rooftops to be collected and filtered. We weave them in through the landscaping so that you don't even know that you're walking through a stormwater practice. It just becomes part of the courtyard and you feel like you're in a lush green environment. We also have a porous pavement parking lot adjacent to the existing one that was constructed between 2014 and 2016. And all of those practices will then discharge into the existing stormwater management practice for peak flow attenuation. There's a series of standards beyond water quality treatment that require us to obtain water or to attenuate water quantity from larger storm events, and that's where this practice is still applicable. Relative to water and sewer, we have provided water and sewer flow demands to the village. I believe they've verified the numbers. We are currently awaiting some village-wide modeling to review, and our intent as we move from the SEQR process into detailed site plan review, when we come back to the planning board, is to coordinate with the village engineer to decide the optimal locations for both the village and the applicant. So we could either tie to White Plains Road, the water main currently stops at the corner of our property, or to Martling. I haven't seen the modeling yet. I'm guessing that it's going to show White Plains Road as the more optimal connection, but as we review the modeling, we'll work with the village engineer to decide which is the best way. Similar with sewer. We've begun looking at what it would take to come out Martling sewer versus 119, if any off-site improvements would be necessary. Again, these are things that we'll coordinate as part of the site plan process with the village engineer's office. All right. That being said, we're really here to listen and answer any questions.
That concludes our long-winded presentation, and we look forward to any comments. Thank you.
Thank you. That's clear, concise. Compliment you on doing that. I think it laid it out very well.
Thank you very much.
So let's turn to the people in the audience first. If anybody has a question or a comment they would like to make, if you would come up to the mic, identify yourself and where you reside.
Good evening. My name is Dan Patrick. I'm from law firm Cuddy and Fader. I'm here on behalf of Montefiore, the owners of 555 South Broadway. First of all, we want to say that we are fully supportive of this application. Our one comment is that we hope in any recommendation that this board makes to the Board of Trustees, that this board will consider some of the comments that we raised in we submitted a March 14th, 2018 letter, which copied a letter we initially sent to the Board of Trustees making some suggestions regarding the proposed rezoning in the floating zone. So that's all we have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Any comments or questions? Members of the staff, any comments or questions? Oh, the staff first, and we'll go to the board. Bob, Dan?
Just a comment, and maybe Dan can address this. They provided the information for the modeling for the, I guess, the water study. Has that been completed? And can you fill, if you have any other questions on that?
Rich, thank you for giving us an update on it. On the water studies, well, they looked at two options. One was connect either on Martling Avenue or to Route 119. The initial option of Route 119, because there's a small line there, it's a 4-inch line, there is inadequate flow, so the only option without major improvements to the water system would be to connect on 119. The closest water main to their tap would be at 99 White Plains Road, so there would be adequate flow for the water. And in the same instance with the sewer, originally they wanted to connect on again on Martling Avenue, and after doing some exploration, there are some pump systems and there's some flat areas that seem to cause a problem, and the alternative would be to go on Route 119 to connect into the sewer on that road. But there would have to be additional studies, explorations to see if there's any other low spots that down the road that would have to be improved.
The applicant may want to, after talking to the village engineer, embellish that way in the FEIS and kind of institutionalize what you're planning on doing going forward. The other thing is, I think there was a manhole issue too, but you're aware of that. The other thing is could you address the traffic? I mean, Kimley Horn did a significant traffic study which addressed Broadway as well as 119. And one of the comments that you may want to address is, are there any specific conditions or other things on Broadway that distinguish it or differentiate it from 119 vis-a-vis this type of a development? If that makes any sense to you.
The whole notion of the gas moratorium and that you've put your application in, and good for you, you've got your application in on time. There is an issue called climate change, and we're having some real ramifications of it. And I think we ask as a board, every one of our applicants to consider renewable energy, either as a primary or a supplementary source of your energy for the building. And I think we will press pretty hard, if you guys agree with that comment, for addressing that as in addition to, I mean, granted, you have needs, all healthcare have pretty significant needs for energy and for sort of constant flow. I see a building there that has potentially a big flat roof. To say that you can't get any solar panels on it seems dubious. So I would ask that part of this investigation be to look at that and see how you can be benefited. There's a lot of money to be had to help you with that by the state now.
I would only wanted to say, we will definitely study that more thoroughly and give you a response.
Okay, that's great.
Any other board members, comments or questions?
I have a question. I was wondering where in the document you've addressed the affordable unit question. I know you discussed it, or one of you discussed it, but I just don't know where in the document it's noted, which was a suggestion to set
Yes.
aside a few of the units for
Yeah.
affordability.
Yeah, Mark tells me it's Appendix W,
Appendix W. Okay, thank you.
pretty much what I said before.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah,
from the
The
board?
question I had, what were you planning on backup power for the facility? Because what we've run across is that sometimes the backup generators would be diesel fueled, and we'd like to know what your plans would be to not go that route if possible.
We will look in that and give you an answer.
Okay. Any others? All right, I'm going to make a motion.
If I might, just a housekeeping, there were 15 questions that were asked of us between the time we prepared the initial SDEIS. And those 15 documents are separately listed, and they're in Appendix W.
Okay.
So if the question is, where do I find the new stuff? Where do I
Right.
find all these answers to the questions they've asked?
And
The
maybe,
answer is Appendix W.
it may be helpful, because you've gone in, was it 149 questions? I forget. But there were
I thought it was only
comments
48.
that were begin, you may want to integrate that in your FEIS and address those in one document, so you can see everything from beginning to
Yes,
That's a good idea. It's a good idea.
excellent.
That's 150.
All right. I'm going to, with the agreement of our
I want
board.
to ask if there's a-
Oh, Dan, you
Yes,
still on?
Chairman, I just have, maybe you'd like to ask the applicant how they plan on addressing the recreation fees, any impact on recreation?
Oh, yes. Dan brought up an important point. Addressing the recreation fees for the project should be part of the, something we would want a response to.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Dan, thank you. With the agreement of my colleagues, I'm going to move that we continue the public hearing on the draft SEIS at our next meeting, so the planning board and staff has additional time for considering comments and questions at its July work session. We should be able to close the public hearing at the July meeting, I believe, but I think we need to do our due diligence by having another work session for the staff and the planning board to go have a little more time really for comments and questions. And also we'll give the public one final chance at that next meeting, and then I think we're ready for closure probably.
I second that.
If I
The
may,
motion is seconded. On the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
just for clarification then, the public hearing date would be?
The fourth Monday in July, right? July 22nd.
July 22nd, and then the written comment period would be 10 days
10
after
days
that?
after that point, right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda tonight is a continuation of public hearing, JCC on the Hudson, to amend site plan approval dated April 25th, 2011. Amended August 26, 2013, to provide additional on-site parking by expanding the west parking lot by 6,000 square feet. Yeah.
Excuse me, I just wanted to... Kathy, maybe you can help with this, and maybe Liz can. It's concerning to me that the people who live around this project maybe don't know that this hearing is happening, and how can we reach out to them to, not for this coming, for artists, how can we reach out so that people who maybe don't watch the planning board, but maybe who are concerned that something's happening, that if they knew that something's happening in their neighborhood, how do we reach out to make this better known?
They were given notice, right?
So the individual people who live, the individual residents around this property were all, or the homeowner, or the owners, or the residents, or what?
I don't remember receiving, all the letters with the end of the area, but I don't remember receiving anything. I mean, can you put notices up or something?
Can we
Because
put something?
People don't have,
Yeah.
or they might not, they might only lived here for 2 or 3 years or whatever, and they might be very interested, and a lot of people have no idea.
Well,
I know there's a little sign on Martling Avenue, but, you
you
know,
have to go down there.
yeah.
But
There's no, you have the
Mailings,
public,
right?
you have,
we
there's no
had, we
mailing.
had,
Yes,
we
there was
did,
a
we
mailing.
did do
There was,
mailings.
yes.
Okay.
Did the
There
mailing.
was a complete mailing done.
So to the owners?
To everyone,
Whoever within how many feet?
100 feet, all of
100 feet.
100 feet.
Oh, 100 feet, okay. Would that have included Ridgecroft or 100 feet of that area is mostly, Hitachi and a couple other office
There
buildings?
were quite a few. There were quite a few.
Pardon
How
me?
many?
I would say at least over 100, I think. There were
This
quite a
thing
few.
there was over 100.
At least 100,
Yeah,
okay.
I'll check.
Yeah,
Can we
just
put
check.
some notices, I don't know, on telephone poles, I don't know. It just seems like no one from the public spoke.
Yeah.
There's got to be people who are interested in this project who will have significant and probably productive things to say.
I mean, there's a Facebook group, but I don't.
You can post it in Village Hall, you could place it
It is
on the website, saying that this is a continuation of a public hearing on Seabrook.
It is on the
Look at the
website.
documents and whatever, so it's a website.
Yeah, Liz is saying it's already on.
It's all over,
So-
yes.
It's all over?
I mean, I don't know if there's anything the board can do, but if certainly if community members want to post it, they can on Facebook or whatever other things they want to do.
At least, each of these buildings have boards, so, except for Sleepy Hollow, which is a rental, but, Edgemont and all of them they do have boards, so it's possible we could reach out to the chair of their boards you know, just to, maybe they can distribute that
Okay,
information.
you and I'll do this.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the point, Joe, because it was surprising to me too that there were so few
Okay,
people.
no
here,
one.
but I don't know. Okay, Dan, let me ask you a question. We're back to the JCC. Before I read the negative declaration for this, are there anything needed still for this that you see, or
Anything else needed?
anything else needed for this
I
project?
just want to update the board.
Oh,
We just
we just
received late this afternoon a letter from
Suzanne.
Suzanne Nolan, the landscape architect. They apparently had meetings, and she's seen the latest landscape plan.
Excuse me,
And
I'm
she's-
recused on this one.
Okay.
She's satisfied with the plan. She had originally suggested removing some large trees, but I guess with the fear of removing the trees, that creates some open spots, the trees will be left in place, and they're gonna landscape in the lower areas.
Okay.
Did you all, we got this at the last minute
Mhm.
tonight. Did you all get a
No.
copy of that?
No, not yet. Not yet. Thank you, though. Okay, I'm going to read only a portion of this negative declaration, but a copy will be provided to the applicant, and the entire negative declaration will be recorded in the minutes of this meeting. Thank you. This is the determination of significance for the proposed action by JCC on the Hudson. The proposed action is an amendment to an existing site plan for the expansion of the west parking lot by 6,100 square feet to accommodate an additional 29 parking spaces in the LB or light business zone. The reason for the proposed action is the occurrence of a parking overflow at peak periods on adjacent roads, Paulding and Van Wart Avenues. The west parking lot at the rear of the JCC building is proposed to be extended approximately 50 feet to the south for an additional 29 parking spaces. The parking lot expansion will require a variance from the ZBA for the rear yard, which requires a 60-foot setback and a raised planting bed for stalls 16 to 29. The survey shows a lot line running through the JCC building. This requires the planning board approval of a subdivision plat which will merge the 4 lots on the property into 1 lot. Mitigation measures. The new parking spaces will be provided by restriping existing pavement for stalls 1 through 12, adding 6,150 square foot of new pavement, and widening travel lanes to 24-foot width. 2 parking islands, planting beds have been added at the southern end of the expanded parking area. A rain garden or vegetated detention basin has been included. At the request of the planning board, the applicant explored grass pavers for the parking area, which could support both parking and outdoor play uses. The applicant indicated asphalt is the preferred surface for maintenance and plowing, and also anticipates the regular use of the parking lot, which would limit play opportunities in that area. Even with the parking lot expansion, there will still be 90-foot by 120-foot area for use for the play field. Public comment raised the issue of landscaping for screening of a residential property that was not provided previously on the site. The site plan was revised to include new landscaping along the north boundary and 25 feet along the west side of the property to provide screening for the residential property at 26 and 36 Paulding Avenue. Plans will be further revised to address recommendations of the village landscape consultant in her 5/30/19 staff report, and we've heard that we have received now information from the village landscape consultant. The emergency access gate will be widened from 12 feet to 16 feet at the request of the fire department, and the plan will indicate that this area shall be kept clear of debris with plant and lawn maintenance. Stormwater analysis and photometrics lighting plan have been provided to the village engineer. Interim ED is formalizing agreement with the Doubletree Hotel regarding overflow need for employee parking. Based on a review of the EAF, memos from the village engineer, consulting planner, and landscape consultant, public comment received, and information provided by the applicant, the planning board has determined that the proposed action is not expected to result in any significant adverse impacts that would rise to the level of significance required for a positive declaration. Based on this information and analysis and supporting documentation, I move that the proposed action will not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts, and therefore a negative declaration should be issued for this proposed action. Do we have a second on the motion? On the motion?
Aye.
Okay. You can now go to the ZBA to get their decisions on the variances needed. And I would move then that we continue the public hearing on the site plan approval when you've accomplished that.
Perfect, thank you, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On the motion to continue the public hearing? Second?
Second.
On the motion? Aye. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Now, we have a new public hearing tonight. So let me read the notice of our new public hearing. Please take, this is, let me read it from the agenda first. Well, is that the agenda? Okay. Thank you. This is Rohit Serene, 203 Riverview Avenue, site plan approval for a change of use from an existing garage into habitable space. Please take notice that the Planning Board of the Village of Tarrytown will hold a public hearing on Monday, June 24th, 2019 at 7 p.m. at the Municipal Building for the site plan approval for a change of use from an existing garage into habitable space. The property is located at 203 Riverview Avenue and is shown on the tax maps of the Village of Tarrytown as sheet 1.100, block 65, lots 32, and is located in the R7.5 zone. Documents are available for inspection in the Planning and Zoning Office. Good evening, Sam. Tell us about it.
Good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is Sam Vieira. I'm the project architect. Mr. Serene, the applicant, is also here this evening. This project was actually, the applications for this project were actually started about a year ago. The Zoning Board of Appeals granted the required variance to allow the parking of the required off-street parking spaces in the front yard. That was almost a year to the date in June of 2018. The zoning board granted the required variance. Subsequently, the owner needed to withdraw the application for personal reasons, and we've now started up again. We've gone before the Architects Review Board earlier this month. They've gotten approval. The modification is very simple. An existing garage door has been replaced with 2 windows, and because of the writing in language in section 305, 132A1 of the zoning ordinance, when there is a change of use of a building, this board needs to perform a site plan review. So effectively, we are here this evening to present this and to get approval to convert what is now a single-car garage into a TV room and to allow the cars to be parked out front. Or car, because it was a single-car garage.
Anyone in the audience have any comments or questions? Staff members?
No, it's very, really no questions. I mean, the ARB has to review this and approve it.
It already, for the record, they approved it earlier this month.
See, you guys stay on this. You guys move too fast for me.
I tell you.
No, it's pretty self-evident type of application.
Before we have Paul read the resolution, I'm going to officially move that we declare this action a type 2 action.
Second.
On the motion?
Aye.
Paul, you are on.
Okay, I'm only going to read a portion of the resolution, but a copy of the general and specific site plan. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Paul on the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
But a copy of the general and specific site plan conditions will be provided to the applicant, and the entire site plan approval resolution will be recorded in the minutes of this meeting. Application of Rohit Serene. Property is 203 Riverview Avenue, sheet 1.100, block 65, lot 32, and zone R-7.5. Resolution of site plan approval. Background. 1. The applicant requested site plan approval for a change of use from an existing single-car garage into habitable space at property located at 203 Riverview Avenue. The existing attached garage will not be enlarged. The only exterior change will be the replacement of the existing garage door with 2 new windows. 2, the planning board on June 24th, 2019 determined this to be a type 2 action under New York State DEC 617.5C11, construction or expansion of a single-family or two-family or a three-family residence on an approved lot, and therefore no further SEQA review is necessary. Determination. The planning board determines that based upon the findings and the reasoning set forth below, the application for site plan approval is granted subject to the conditions set forth below. Findings. The planning board considers the standards set forth in the Village of Tarrytown zoning code, Chapter 305, Article 16, and finds that subject to the conditions set forth below, the proposed site plan is consistent with the site plan design and development principles and standards set forth therein. Except as otherwise provided herein, all work shall be performed in strict compliance with the plan submitted to the planning and approved by the planning board as follows. 3, general conditions. A, prerequisites to signing site plan. The following conditions must be met before the planning board chair may sign the approved site plan, final site plan. I think that's
I
it.
then move that the planning board approve the proposed site plan. Do we have a second
Second.
on the motion?
Aye.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you, sir. All right, our last item on the agenda is a preliminary presentation, South Tarrytown Self-Storage, South Depot Plaza, Lot 37, a referral by the Board of Trustees for recommendation of a petition for a zone change to allow for a brewery-type restaurant use. At its work session in June, the planning board discussed this, and we're all in favor of making this recommendation to the Board of Trustees. So I'm going to move that the board make this recommendation for rezoning of Lot 37 on South Depot Plaza from WD zone to an ID zone, and that it be forwarded to the Board of Trustees.
I second that.
On the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We know there've been some discussions about architecture and things. My client has hired a new architect, so he's got a really preliminary rendering. We just wanted, I know it's not what we're here for, but we just thought we'd show it to you and just see if anybody had a reaction. This is for the restaurant brewery. Thought it was kind of an industrial, modern kind of, considering it's in an industrial area. We know how concerned you are with architecture. We want to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Which way I'll tell you my first reaction, it doesn't overwhelm me at all. That's my first reaction.
With no context, it looks like it landed from the moon. So you know, what's the scale, everything else.
Yeah.
And I'd want to understand if there's any outside accommodation seating, and how does the parking
Well, we're
work
trying to
for
work
that?
with the existing building, so it's tough. We're kind of stuck with where it sits on the site. They are looking for opportunities for some outdoor seating, but with working with the existing lot and the existing building, it's a little tight.
Just for clarification, those three roll-up doors, they're gonna be along the driveway side, which means the steps are on the rear? The access is from the rear?
No,
No, it's the side.
it's the side.
That's the side.
So how do you get access to the roll-up doors?
No, the
They're-
roll-up doors are
just-
not for access. They're just
Thank you.
They're just visual.
Okay.
They're just,
visual, correct.
and to allow them to be opened up in nice weather
It's the
and,
industrial.
excuse me.
So they're facing east?
West.
West,
The stairs are
If they're
facing west,
if
right?
those doors
The stairs
facing-
are facing west, the doors are facing north.
Right. I think it's a good
So the
start.
doors are facing Depot Plaza.
So the door.
This is Depot Plaza here.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you come off the parking lot and see that.
Facing the train station. So it's
looking for.
Okay, so I think this is an
You need a
indication
site
of
map
how
now,
we need
that
some
doesn't,
context.
your driver.
and
We
Yeah,
understand, this
that
was,
was
he just
different.
hired the
I would
architect, he
say-
did something for
I would
us
say keep
quickly.
going.
Those stairs in the ramp are facing,
Yeah, keep going,
where the
but-
cell tower was.
Facing the cell tower, exactly, so if they're facing the cell tower, that's what I was trying to get at. Therefore, that entry is from the back, not in the, not look from the.
We'll bring it to
front.
you in context.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just really were
I thought
trying,
that would have been where the housing was.
this was really just an effort to show you we're trying. And see if we were starting in the right direction. We know it needs context, we know it's just, but it was the general idea.
You're going to do an adaptive reuse of the existing building.
Yeah,
Looks
so
very
that's why
different.
it's sort of the industrial.
Well, the
because that
industrial
is an
part is
industrial
okay.
area.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't have a problem with it. It looks underdeveloped. I mean,
It
it
is.
is. And so, yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
What's the exterior cladding?
Excuse me, I'm sorry?
The exterior cladding,
We're not there
we
yet.
haven't started. We're not there yet. This is our first rendering of
and how about the glass? Because we're, I mean, just this is from me, I would like to see glass that is not blue or reflective.
clear.
So if it'd be something that it'd be more of a
Industrial,
what?
more industrial.
Well, no, just something that is more, would be less opaque than than reflective glass. 'Cause
Make it more
I
open.
think we're
and
trying to
inviting.
encourage, more of an interaction between the street and the
Make it
building.
open and inviting.
Right, exactly,
Any restaurant tenant's gonna wanna be able to have people looking in,
right.
Yeah.
so there's gonna be clear glass.
Okay,
That's a good start.
It's a good start.
thank you, that's,
Thank you.
Yeah.
that's all. We know there's a lot more to be done, and
You-
he
you-
just
you-
hired him on Thursday,
The
so
only other,
this was
the only,
a quick turnaround.
the only other comment, just picking up on the openness into there, I mean, you're going to, if you do a brew pub and you're going to be developing, doing the production inside, you're gonna wanna be able, people wanna be able to see that at some point,
That's yet to be determined, so,
Okay.
okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Very good.